so packed in here. And I think it's just testament to Emmy's beautiful book that there's so many people here who want to celebrate her and celebrate this incredibly beautiful novel. And I can actually talk about the novel forever, and I might just keep you here until midnight talking about this beautiful novel forever. So bear with me. I now have the privilege of introducing Emmy Sasagawa, and I am just so delighted to be here and just to be in conversation with you, Emmy. It's so much fun to see this beautiful book come to light. I'm about to embarrass Emmy completely because she hates being in the spotlight, but I'm going to do that tonight. So a lot of you will know that Emmy is currently Director of Communications at UBC, but she does so much more than that. I think we can all agree it's kind of extraordinary, all the things that she does. She holds a degree from the London School of Economics and a master's in journalism from UBC. Now, if that wasn't enough, she's also working on her MFA at UBC in creative writing, and I think there's some people who have taken courses with her in that particular program. She's also a graduate from the writing studio at Simon Fraser University. So far tonight, I like that. I'm just going to keep on saying that over and over so you can. And she's a former fellow of the News 21 Fellow. She's a former fellow of News 21 by Carnegie Knight Initiative on the Future of Journalism Fellowship as well, International Reporting Program Fellowship by the Global Reporting Center too. She's received the Edward R. Murrow Award, the Rafe Mayer Award for Excellence in Journalism, and the Canadian Online Publishing Award. And her work has been published in newspapers all across North America, from the Tyee to the Washington Post. So when I first met Emmy at UBC, I have to admit, I was kind of spellbound. In her quiet, generous, and affirming way, she always brought a spirit of grace, determination, and ethics to everything that she does. I was in awe of her knowledge of media relations, but then I learned that she was also a creative writer, and then, I know you're gonna be mortified, I just went and read everything that she had written, because it was so beautiful. Her work, if you don't know it, has appeared in Room, Rice Paper, and now we have this gorgeous new novel, Atomweight, which tells the story of Aki. I'm sure how many of you have read the book? A lot of you, that's great, okay, cool. But let me tell you a little bit about it for those of you who haven't had a chance to read it, and of course you're buying it tonight, so you're gonna read all about it later. But it's a story about Aki, a good girl, good student, good daughter, from a loving but demanding multiracial family who, after being triggered by a violent incident, begins picking fights with random strangers. This is a story about what it means to be mixed race, what it means to be queer, and of course, power. And it also reflects on questions of oppression and privilege. It also is about how we take up place and space in the world. And in a review that was just in the Tyee today, Jackie Wong calls it a powerful debut novel about transformation, hybrid identity, and the ways in which we underestimate ourselves. I can't wait to talk to you about that. So Emmy, I want to say first of all, thank you for having this opportunity, sharing this opportunity with us to learn more about this beautiful novel. And maybe we could start with the reading. I'd love to hear a little bit. Maybe you can set it up for us before you read.
Sure. I'll stand up to project.
I'll wake.
So thank you, Manal, and thank you all for being here. This is surreal. If you know me in my personal life, I am a textbook introvert, so this is, a challenging situation, but we'll deal with it for the next hour or so. And the first passage that I wanted to read was actually from the prologue, so it will set up the novel, and yeah, I'll get started with that. I took another sip of the too sweet cocktail in front of me. Surprise me, I'd said to the middle-aged bartender when he asked me what I wanted to drink. I was sitting alone at a pub near Holborn, popular with the university crowd. I'd walked by it many times, but never been inside. That Thursday, I counted on a full house. Instead, the pub was empty. Just a couple of businessmen having a heated discussion about the 2008 financial crisis and how the Bank of England intended to pump £75 million into the economy. And a group of 5 men who looked to be a few years older than me, early 20s maybe. In the 6 months I've been attending the London School of Economics, I'd learned to recognize the overblown egos of a certain class of British schoolboy. Would nothing to prove and little to lose, a few drinks were the only excuse they needed for bigotry or misogyny. Somebody had picked up a girl at a party last night. She was wild, if you know what I mean. Another one was waiting for the right time to text back after a first date. 2 days would suffice, one of his friends advised. A third one was bragging about a threesome he once had with 2 German tourists. Their remarks annoyed me, but this was just misguided masculinity. Nothing made my blood boil or my hands twitch. I itched for a confrontation, but they didn't excite me. No spark. I took another sip of my cocktail and wondered why more women weren't gay. The front door swung open and slammed against a chair, admitting a frigid wind and a young South Asian man who took a seat at the bar and ordered a pint. I pulled my hair back from my face so I could see him better. He was a definition of average. Short, only a couple of inches taller than me, with straight black hair perfectly parted to one side, wearing the caramel boots, acid wash jeans, and navy blue bomber jacket typical of first-generation Asians on the rise. He and I were the same hue of brown, but where the hairs on my hands were thin and light, his were thick and black. There was something about his features that reminded me of Aisha. The nose, the eyebrows. He looked like Assad. Or was it just me, thinking all South Asian men looked the same? I inhaled deeply, stretching my arms above my head, then turned to the bar and took the last sip of my drink. Do you want another one of those? The younger bartender, Teddy, according to his name tag, came over. It's all right, just a shot of vodka. You here often? The Assad lookalike asked. I feel like I've seen you before. His right foot tapped on the footrest to the rhythm of the rain. I doubt it, I replied curtly, folding the napkin in front of me into a triangle. I looked at his biceps, not much bigger than mine. Technically, I'm not supposed to drink. He moved a seat nearer. His eyelashes were so long they curled up, just like Aisha's. I could smell the rain on him, mixed in with cigarettes. I missed how she smelled the cigarettes. He took a large gulp of his beer and then turned to me. Muslims are not supposed to drink. Then why do you, I asked, spurring him on, sizing him up, my jaw tightening in anticipation. I guess I don't like being told what to do. He laughed and downed the rest of his beer, keeping eye contact with me, inviting complicity in his religious transgression. Another one, he called to Teddy. I couldn't decide whether he was trying to impress me, or if he was just a regular asshole. Maybe this was a straight courting ritual, one I was not familiar with. His attention felt forced, repulsive, and I welcomed the familiar heat rising to my head, a blend of anger and elation. He was pushing the right buttons. I smiled as Teddy wiped the counter with a dirty cloth and placed a shot of vodka in front of me. He stretched over the bar on the tip of his toes and leaned in. Is he bothering you? I can ask him to move. It's fine, thank you, I said, tight-lipped. I'm sure Teddy's intentions were good, but I hadn't asked for help. See the boyfriend? Assad lookalike asked. No. My nostrils flared as I turned to face him. Penises don't interest me. The man's eyes widened. That's a bold statement. He laughed louder than necessary, feigning ease. I stared at him. I guess I don't like being told who to like. Touché. He turned to face me as Teddy exchanged the empty beer glass for a full one. I nodded slowly. The man and I locked eyes. He opened his mouth, but then looked away. We were close. I could feel it. Now was not the time to be coy. It looks like you have more to say about this. I pressed my lips together and inhaled. Please, do enlighten me on your unsolicited opinion. Idiocy only needs the smallest opportunity to make an appearance. He sneered. You should be careful who you go around saying that to. He took a sip of his beer. If you were my sister, I'd set you straight. He shifted his body on the seat and turned away from me. Rage rose from the pit of my stomach, up my chest, all the way to my head. My legs shook under the counter. I moved my neck from side to side. Even then, in the thick of unrepressed anger, I wondered if I was enough, big enough, strong enough. At 5'4" and just over 100 pounds, I was an Atomweight, lighter than straw. Maybe that's why he couldn't have known what would happen next.
sets us up perfectly for the conversation we're going to have tonight. And I just love the way that leaves us on a cliffhanger, right? Like, aren't you dying to know more what happens next? I mean, there's so much I want to talk to you about, but I thought maybe we could start with the part that you just read, because in that particular section, I couldn't help but notice that there are some really kind of clever gestures to particular stereotypes that come up in that section, like all South Asian men look the same, et cetera, et cetera. I wanted to hear a little bit about how you lean into those stereotypes and you're playing with those stereotypes and the decisions you made around that particular section in relation to some stereotypes.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Yeah, the leaning into the tropes and the stereotypes was definitely deliberate. I wanted to demonstrate that, you know, even as a racialized person, we all carry oppression and privilege, and we all are able to have biases and to be prejudiced in our own ways. And I wanted to set the stage for the novel where you could really see Aki's maturity and growth in terms of understanding her positionality, her intersectionality, and how she takes up space in the world and what that means.
I love that. I think it's such a clever gesture towards like a situated knowledge and helping us see exactly where she is in that moment. So I thought that was really cool. The book starts with a really beautiful epigram. I wonder if you wouldn't mind reading it for us, if that's okay. It's by Leila Delia.
Grapes must be crushed to make wine. Diamonds form under pressure. Olives are pressed to release oil. Seeds grow in darkness. Whenever you feel crushed, under pressure, pressed, or in darkness, you're in a powerful place of transformation and transmutation.
See, already like in the whole room.
Not my words.
But you chose them, right? And they're such powerful words. And given that, you know, spoiler alert, but I think you already know here, that, you know, your character Aki is this very strong-willed person, right? Who looks for fights to feel alive. Tell us about the choice of the epigram there. Like, when did you find it and how did you know? And did it influence the way that you wrote the rest of the book?
I found it pretty later on, actually. I would say it was probably the second to last draft that I submitted to my publisher. And at that time, I was trying to get a little fancy with the Atomweight concept. And I wanted to play into the atom aspect of it. So actually, I had broken up the book into 3 sections. It was fusion, fission, and transmutation. So it was on a nod to physics. And I had selected quotes or poems that I felt fit really well. My publisher and editor said, that's too on the nose. Let's not divide the book that way. And this was just a poem that really stuck with me, and so I wanted to find a place for it, and I felt like the epigraph was the perfect place for it.
It really does feel like it's the perfect place for it, given that focus on, you know, thinking about transformation and transmutation. I really love that. I think that's so gorgeous. When you were speaking, just before you spoke, you made a gesture towards yourself as an introvert.
Yes.
Which is why I know this kind of setting is like, you know,
it's very
crazy for
here.
you. You've got a section in the book, and just a quote, it's the quiet ones you have to watch out for. Silence is not synonymous with apathy, but that is how the world reads introverts. We thrive in the space of what is left unsaid in commas, semicolons, and ellipses. Behind poker faces, we are wild cards teetering between perfect balance and complete chaos, a silence away. I say the world is right to watch out for us, end quote. Ooh, right? So beautiful. So I have to ask you, tell us more about your protagonist's identification as an introvert. I mean, she seems almost upfront, almost like an extrovert in a way about being an introvert.
Yeah, I guess so. I think it's thinking about like separating the writer from the narrator from the character. So the writer is Emmy, the narrator is Aki many years after all of this has happened, and then the character in the book is 19-year-old Aki. So we're talking about somebody who's probably in their mid to late 20s, who's able to reflect back on what that experience was like, and through maturity kind of reflect on, I'm an introvert and the world sees me in a certain way, and yet there's so much that I don't allow to be out there. So I'm a force to be reckoned with.
And I love that distinction you're making between like the protagonist and all. I think it's really important to see those different spaces, because I know one of the things, given that I have the pleasure of hanging out with you a little bit over the last, we both work at UBC together, so we get to see each other all the time, which is a real gift for me, I have to say. But I know one of the things you often get asked about this book is, well, is it just a memoir? Isn't it just the story about your life? And I remember reading in the Tyee piece that a lot of you probably saw recently, it was just today I read it, that Aki was a gift to your younger self, an experiment in freedom and recklessness. And I love that. There's something really beautiful about that. Can you speak to that idea a little?
Yeah. I think, it is a novel, it is fiction, but it's, I think in the interview with Tyee, I said it was a tangential inevitability to sort of end up exploring my life or reflecting on things that happened to me. I think as writers, a lot of us do that. Sometimes it's more on the nose than others. And I wanted Aki to be a representation of everything that I've ever been and everything I could be in all its messiness. So she's all the potential of a younger Emmy, and all of that potential without any boundaries, right? And so what would it take if, what would it mean if you took the anger and made it tangible? What would it mean if you took that growth and you catalyzed it and made it all happen within the span of a year? I mean, certainly Aki's way more mature than I was as a 19-year-old. Maybe even as I am now. And so I think it is an exercise in recklessness. It's an exercise in possibility, right?
I love that idea of it being an exercise in possibility. I always think there's a great line from Anne Michaels who says, "I see now that I must give what I most need." And maybe in some ways this is the book that you're gifting to that younger self of yours.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's a theme that runs throughout this book, which is that of seeking perfection. That Aki is always in the grips of being told that she needs to be perfect in some way, right? In that quest. And I was struck that in the very first chapter, one of the very first things that Aki's dad says to Aki is that she is perfect. And most kids don't get to hear that from their parents, that they're perfect. But then a few lines later, Aki admits that being called perfect is one of the worst things anyone can be. Everything to lose and nothing to gain, an infinite number of ways to disappoint. So can we talk a little bit about how Aki feels so despairing of being called perfect and her own, I think, her complicated relationship with perfection?
Yeah. Growing up, there was a saying, a Japanese saying that my dad would share with me all the time, which is, it's always best to be second than to be first. Because when you're second, there's still room to grow. And so I think the feeling that Aki is going through is that she feels that she's first. And in order to maintain that level, she can make absolutely no mistakes, right? When you're perfect, everything you're doing is being watched closely. When you feel like that's the expectation of the world around you. And yeah, it's a sense of being stuck, of being trapped in a scenario where it's a lose-lose. You either do something wrong and you're not perfect, or you continue to be perfect and you're anxious about it. I think a lot of first children experience that.
Let's talk a little bit about Aki's ethnic identity as a mixed race person in the world. Maybe you could tell everybody how she identifies in terms of her mixed identity, and why you decided to make her mixed race and her relationship to the label of multiraciality.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of selfishly, I'm mixed. I'm Brazilian Japanese. Making Aki Brazilian Japanese was too close, according to Tidewater, so we've decided to make her Japanese Canadian Colombian. And I mean, the intention with it is that I really wanted to explore what it feels like to live in a queer mixed body. There's very much a sense of duality throughout the novel, with Aki feeling like she has to pick whether she's good or bad, whether she's Japanese or Asian or Latina, whether she is a good daughter or somebody who's disappointing her parents, straight or queer. And so those binaries only serve to sort of destroy her and to fragment her even further. And I felt like it was important for me to share the experience that I've had living in a queer mixed body.
Yeah, you know, dare I say, but as someone who does work in mixed race studies, to see the way you portray this character, you really brought the story of what it means to be mixed race and have these Canadian connections alive. And I really haven't seen a book that's done that in quite the way that you've done it here. So I just love everything about it. I've already warned Emily that I'm going to use her book in all my courses now, so she has to be prepared. Another thing about the book that those of you who have read it will know that it's a very definitively global book, that it travels in many different spaces. It goes to London and Vancouver, and there's some gorgeous images of London, and just a few examples of this. She says at one point, there's teacher said London was a textbook definition of dignified degeneracy, which I thought was really beautiful. And then Aki feels that London is most beautiful on Saturday mornings, and those of you who are familiar with London probably know that experience intimately. It becomes a place where Aki can jettison her past and identify who she wants to be in a new city. Can you tell us a little bit about Aki's flight to London, her relationship to London, and just how the city seems to define her? Because you do this you offer these emotional geographies of the space that really come alive here.
Yeah. Again, selfishly, and this is the part where it's a bit based on real life, I too went to London for my undergrad. I also went to the London School of Economics, and it was such an amazing experience to be in a new city and to be able to explore my identity unencumbered by expectations of family, friends, and people who knew me. And so I wanted to provide the character with that same opportunity. I think, you know, a lot of us don't necessarily maybe move to a new city. Maybe we go to university, maybe we start work. And it's a relatable journey to sort of leave what was once a very small world and try to expand it when you're that young. London is, by all accounts, like a multiracial, cosmopolitan place, and I felt like it would be an interesting setting to explore race, to explore power and oppression, and yeah, I sort of just leaned into it.
I'm so glad that you did, because it really comes alive when you're reading it, so that makes it really feel so powerful. Another thing about the book that I find to be extraordinary is the way that it portrays female friendships. And you know, I think we've all read books that explore that theme, but you do this so beautifully here, because all the women that Aki has a friendship with are, again, definitively global in their perspective, their worldview, their experience. In particular, you paint portraits of two women, Abby and Jenica, and how these friendships keep Aki very moored and tethered in some really important ways. Can we talk if that was a deliberate choice on your part to kind of play with some of the ways in which we understand sometimes the tensions that exist between women, but you've done something beautiful here where you've really portrayed the love?
Yeah, it was certainly deliberate. I feel like in some ways, you know, there are moments in your life that create the perfect setting for strong friendships, and your undergrad is one of them. And for the first time, you're away from home, and you're building your chosen community, your chosen family. And so I wanted there to be a sense that Aki is picking these individuals, and they're also picking her to be part of their own family. And while I'm sure that there could be plots and plot lines around, you know, complicated situations, I felt like it was really important for Aki to have a supportive, like tether to like the real world, and these friends were that tether to her, especially while she was in London.
No, No, and I love that because I think it offers undergrads who will read the book a chance to see what could be possible during their undergrad too, to know that you could build those kinds of friendships that could be lifelong and lasting, as happens for Aki in the first few years of what we see in the book. So now I have to wait for the sequel to see what happens with it. One of the things about this book that struck me after I've read it a couple times now, and I keep on thinking about how it seems to communicate a theme of what it means to be broken. And you do this beautiful job of giving us kinds of glimpses into what brokenness means. And it seemed to me most vividly through a vase that gets broken. And you speak about it. It's like an hourglass-shaped vase made of clear glass with speckles of blue and green that gets shattered into shards. And it felt like a real foreshadowing, particularly in relation to this old Japanese tradition called kintsugi? This art of putting back broken pottery pieces with gold. It's like, and I just wondered if you could speak to the broken vase and whether or not it was related to this Japanese tradition at all.
Yeah. So Manal shared this question with me a few weeks ago, and it kind of just stuck in my mind. And actually, yesterday I was coming back from getting my haircut and listening to music, and like a sentence came to me. So I'll just say it, and I'll try to explain what I mean by it. We're all born broken, but not in pieces. And what I mean by that is we're all vases or whatever it is that you want to call, and the walls are irregular. There are parts that are thinner, that are more fragile, that are more prone to breaking, and there even might be already parts that have cracks in them. And that's, from the get-go, like our families, our socioeconomic status, our race, ethnicity, etc. Like all of those, our gender, all of those things we're born with. They're there. And it takes certain moments for that vase to be shattered and for it to be broken into pieces. And that's when you're really able to see all the parts of yourself. And that's so difficult and sad, but at the same time, it's such an amazing opportunity to rebuild that vase in the way that you see fit, and to create something new from what was originally broken to begin with. I feel like if we enter the conversation with that as the expectation, are we going to be so much kinder to ourselves when we do break, and when we do fail, and when we have to, grab the Loctite glue and put the vase back together?
I love, yeah. It's really I love everything about what you just said about that. And I love that you're thinking about it within that particular context. And I wonder for those people who are here, who are just getting into the book, if you could speak about Aki's moment when she does feel that she's breaking and how she puts herself back together with the help of her friends.
Yeah, I think, as a queer person, you can probably expect that one of the most difficult moments of your life is going to be your coming out story. It's that moment when the way that you've presented yourself to the world, the way the world has seen you, suddenly is put into question. And the same is true for Aki. She, by all accounts, has been perfect. Her parents tell her she's perfect. She gets good grades. She, by all accounts, looks like a good person. And for the first time, she's confronted with a question mark. Like, okay, but there's this thing about you. How does that change the whole package, right? And that one question is enough for her in her binary world, where you can either be good or bad, to feel like she can never be good again. The only option for her is to be bad. So if she's gonna be bad, might as well lean into it.
Which leads us right into the next question. What does she lean into? Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, she leans into fighting. I really wanted an opportunity to explore anger in this book. And I feel like as women, as racialized women, as Asian women, the expectation is that when we're angry, we shove it down. When we're angry, we don't express it. And I wanted Aki to have the full spectrum of anger. And if anger had to be tangible and it had to turn into violence, then that's what it was going to be. So yeah, I wanted to be able to explore race, gender through the lens of violence, and what it means to fight back, quite literally.
I just love the way you're playing with that idea of like fighting against a heteropatriarchal mold and helping us understand the brute strength of violence as this metaphor, but also such a material fact as she goes out and has all these fights around the city, right? It's beautiful. I also want to talk to you a little bit more about some of the other themes as well in the book. You just talked about Aki's experience of coming out, but Aki also has a significant breakdown around chapter 23 and doesn't even leave her room for like 5 days. Can we talk a little bit about that barricade, the way she barricades herself in the room for a little while? But maybe this will help. This is when she has the run-in with the counselor, Olivia Acton. Okay, so there's this amazing conversation, and those of you who have been in counseling, you know,
I did write it, I promise.
Not all counseling sessions are great ones, right? And it takes a while to find a good therapist. And there's this incredible conversation that goes on in the book with Olivia Acton. And I want to know why the character's named Olivia Acton for one, but we'll get to that. The conversation with the counselor is so terrific because we really see what a terrible therapist she is, but also how Aki comes to realize that Acton isn't actually wrong, right, in what she offers. So tell us a little bit about that scene.
So it's I guess it's a pivotal moment in the book where Aki's friends convince her to finally go see a counselor, and when she gets there, the counselor has nothing but awful things to say to her about how she might be wrecking and ruining everybody's life around her, which is a really hard thing to hear. But in it, there are also some kernels of truth. And the reason why Aki comes to that realization, or why I wanted the character to come to that realization, is sometimes things that are said to us incite such anger and such strong emotions, and we think that we are sort of justified in defending ourselves at all costs. But I often find that the things that provoke us the most hold some level of truth, even if we aren't able to admit it. And it takes Aki 5 days to get to that, to figure out that, to calm down enough to realize that there are kernels of truth in what the counselor said, that maybe they weren't said in the kindest way, and that there probably was a much better way to convey that message, but still, there's something that she can learn from it. We can only control how we react to things, right? So I think it's a turning point for Aki in realizing, okay, I get to be angry, I get to be upset, but whether that leads me to go out and beat someone up, or, you know, to sit in my room and reflect on how I might be affecting the people around me.
Yeah, it's one of the most beautiful things about Aki, just how self-reflective she is throughout the book, and I really appreciated that scene so much. There are a lot of joyful moments in the book, and one of the best things about the book is it really captures stuff that I love around pop culture. So there's all these like gestures to like Axl Rose, for example. There's like Katy Perry. There's all these incredible gestures to things that were popular in the time period in which the book was set. But there's also these sharp and pithy digs at people who are racist. So there's lots of like little jokes about the monarchy and Axl Rose, for example. So can we talk about how much fun you had writing up those sections, and how there seems to be a tongue-in-cheek kind of like joyful approach to making fun of some of these things that a lot of us find really important in terms of pop culture?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's where the Emmy came through in Aki. It was a little gift to myself to be able to be a little snarkier about those moments, and decisive. And as Aki is understanding how her positionality both affects the way that she inhabits the world, but also the way she's perceived, she is then able to articulate some of these pithier, as you put it, descriptions of pop culture.
I have to ask you about Katy Perry, because you have done such a great job with Katy Perry. Can you tell everybody how you're playing with the particular Katy Perry song here and how it doesn't come up once but twice? I just think it's really clever.
It's obviously I Kissed a Girl, because right, it came out right around the time that I was in undergrad. And funnily enough, the reason why I included it is because my father loves Katy Perry. And, you know, my parents too dealt with their own feelings about my coming out and what that meant for me and my life. And the Katy Perry song just felt like a very appropriate way to sort of demonstrate Aki's parents' acceptance of her queerness as a fact and not something to be contested.
And don't you have a scene where the father's actually mouthing the words?
Yeah. My dad would mouth the words.
I just love that it really pops up the page, that part. I think you'll all really enjoy that part too. We don't have much time left, and I know there's going to be questions from a lot of you. So maybe I'll just end with one last question, which is, I couldn't help but notice that you talk a lot about narratives in the book. You use this word a lot, starting on page 163, when Aki talks about all the narratives she tried to concoct in her head, but then you also end with narrative. And the first on your acknowledgments includes narrative too. So Aki acknowledges that the person that she has to, that she needs to thank was the fighter. This idea that thinking through this person who's fierce and vulnerable, strong and reckless. And you say that without being the fighter Aki was, she may not have found the strength to live outside of social narratives. And that without that, she may never have learned that she could fight like a girl. And I just love that line. Can you tell us how you're playing with the power of patriarchy just through that particular way of using narratives? And why the idea of narrative speaks so strongly to you?
Yeah. I mean, I think as anybody who loves reading and writing stories, you would be very, very misguided to not appreciate and revere narrative to a certain extent. But also as somebody who sort of understands how the power of stories can shape our existence as folks from historically marginalized communities. So for me, narrative can mean many different things, especially in that last section we're talking about how society at large is able to define what your story is. And I think what Aki is realizing is that there are lots of different kinds of stories, and certainly there are stories that people tell themselves about you, but you can control the story that you tell yourself about your existence. And perhaps that's the most powerful thing of all.
Well, there's so much more I want to ask you about, but I know there's so many people here who have read the book and probably have questions, so I want to throw it over to you guys and give you a chance to ask a question that you might have. If you have a question, just put up your hand. Feel free to.
Well done, Emmy. So my question is about, I've grappled throughout the book at how many themes are being addressed. It's a little book, and there are, in each of the themes, there's a world that could explode into its own volume. So, you know, from sexuality to coming of age to parents to cultural differences to moving out of the house to first time in school to the bars to the stereotypes, like it's a huge garden of themes. So you have thrown a net over all of these and created this smooth, beautiful story. Congratulations. My question is, which of these themes do you think might propel you into your next work?
Well, that's a big question. I thought the question was going to be something else completely. And I was like, I think so. I'll start by saying that the reason why I wanted the book to explore so many different things is that our existence is complex. We exist on multiple levels all at once. And so to compartmentalize our experience and to say this is a coming of age story, or this is a story about queerness, or this is a story about race, or about being mixed race, that is in some ways to give in to the social narratives that Aki's trying to resist against, right? And so I wanted the book to encompass all of the complexity that this character is. In terms of a theme that I might explore in a future project, I've been recently thinking about working on a story actually about my relationship with my childhood therapist. I've been in therapy since age of 11, and I met this person. She was the first therapist that I ever had, and we had a relationship for over 20 years. And recently she passed. One of the last things that she said to me is, it's you, me, and that which transforms us. I'm not exactly sure what she meant by that, but I feel like I should write about it and find out.
And I cannot wait for that to come out because it feels like that's a book.
So really it's about all those themes.
Yeah, it's about all of those themes, but maybe, you know, it's a spin-off on Olivia Acton, but the good kind of counselor.
I like that.
Sorry, I keep on waving.
Please go ahead.
Hi, Emmy. I have a question about the passage that you read.
Yeah.
So I've heard that passage a couple times, or a few times in different permutations. And actually today was the first time I clued into what sounded to me, and I hope I'm not off base, but you also playing with this tension of a guy comes into a bar, sits beside a woman, and there's this, what would otherwise be read as this sexual tension happening, like his eyelashes curl up, they lock eyes, there's this heat rising. I don't know why I didn't go into that earlier, but was that also very intentional, and what was the, why? Like, why were you doing that?
I wanted to write the first fight as almost like falling in love. Aki's choosing her, you know, her opponent, and I think so much of it also has to do with finding the person that pushes your buttons just in the right way to incite that big act of violence.
I mean, how hard was it to make the shift from fiction to fiction?
Yeah, so all of these loving people that are asking me these difficult questions are from the SFU's Writer Studio. So we all did the program together, and we were, most of us, in the nonfiction stream, which means that this story started off as a short, the book started off as a short story. That was written for a nonfiction course, I guess. So we'll leave it at that. It was difficult. It was really difficult at first. I think when I started writing this story, or when I started writing the book, what felt to me the most important thing was the relationship between mother and daughter. And that's perhaps because I'm very close to my mother. growing up, she was probably my best friend, and I don't say this, just to be cutesy or whatever. I was, as I said, an introvert, and I struggled to make friends, and she was there for me in many ways. We had a really supportive relationship. When I came out, I was really scared of what her reaction was going to be, and so I carefully watched her every move and every reaction, and probably overinterpreted everything that happened. And so that was the Emmy stuck in that moment. And it was only by fictionalizing it and allowing each of the characters to sort of guide their own story that it became what it is today. And the book is actually now more, if anything, a story about siblings. And what was really interesting is that it made me realize, and the book is dedicated to my younger sister, how important it was to have that person in my corner and to have that person that supported me regardless. And sometimes you're so stuck on that one thing that didn't go right that you're unable to see the bigger picture, and in some ways fiction allowed me to see the bigger picture.
Last chance. Yeah, please break.
No, well, okay, I'll preface this with neither of my parents are fluent in English. So they both have read it. Yes. They actually both have read it. They've read it on Kindle because then they can click on the words and it tells them what the words mean. My mom read it really fast and called me multiple times a day saying like, I cried for 2 hours, and like, that it's really moving, it's making me relive certain moments of our, family's life. My dad took 3 weeks to read it. He didn't want to read it at first. And the first time that I asked him what he thought about it, he said, I need some time. Like, I can't tell you right now. And so I asked him like a week later, and then he said, it's really well written for your first book. But I think all in all, I wouldn't be able to write the book if my relationship with my parents wasn't what it is. I wouldn't be able, it's funny, I said that I've been in therapy for over 20 years, and one of the things that I recently realized is, we expect unconditional love from our parents. And my parents never stopped loving me. They just had a hard time accepting certain realities about me. And so it's difficult for them to see that, to reflect on that. And it's also my experience. It's not theirs, right? Like, they have a very different idea of what happened. And they remember things in a very different way. And I think as long as we're able to have that conversation from, this is part of what I experienced, lived through this completely other character, who's not me. And as long as we're able to continue to have that conversation, I think we're in a good place.
I love that. Anybody else? Any last burning questions?
I have one last person question. I'm sorry for this, but have you, you've read the arc, you went through it. When the book came out, it was in its final bits, and you got your 10 copies or whatever, however you ordered from your publisher. Did you read it?
Can I stop you right there, and can you explain to everybody what an ARC is? Because I bet a lot of people here won't know.
An ARC is an advanced reader's copy. It's just
It's this. It says uncorrected proof copy.
Yeah.
That's what I'm reading from. It's probably
It's
might
slightly
be slightly
different.
different than
It's
what
slightly
you get.
different.
Yeah.
So, okay, and it's a two-part question really. So, did you read it? And if you had, what kind of feelings did you have when you read it? Was it exhausting, that kind of thing? If you haven't read it, are you afraid to read it?
Am I afraid to read it?
I was afraid.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, when I submitted the final version to my publisher, I was like, "Ugh, this is bad." And I think you get so close to it that I couldn't see it anymore. I was like, I just need time away from it. I have not read it since then. But I've read it through other people, which is really interesting. So, Joanna called me to say, I've read it and I'm at this part, and I watched my wife read it, and I had friends texting me, my friend and coworker Annie saying like, oh my god, I'm in chapter whatever, and it's like all of these things are happening. I'm like, I can't remember what happened in chapter whatever. So I would look up and I was like, oh, that's what that happened. And so I guess I didn't read it in full, but I got to read bits of it and experience it through the excitement of other people's reading. I don't know that I'm ready to read it from cover to cover yet. Yeah.
Dana.
Hi, I would love to hear a little bit about the process of writing the book, and you mentioned that fiction kind of allowed you to see the bigger picture, and I'm curious how, as you're writing, realizations or new understandings or new perspectives about the story came up, and then how that changed the course of the story, or you incorporated that.
Yeah, so it was a 5-year process, which if you told me at the beginning, I wouldn't have signed up for it. When we were at the writer's studio and we had people come in and they would say, oh, it took me 2 or 3 years to write this book, and that was really quick. And I was like, I don't have 2 or 3 years to spend on one project. Like, that's insane. And yet, 5 years later, there's a certain amount of flexibility, I guess, that you need to have. I think the hardest part is the first draft that you write, and you've put so much like time and effort and love and care into it, and no matter how amazing you are, that is so far from what's gonna be published, if it will ever be published. And so, it was a lot of Marsha bringing me, huge sheets of like construction paper and moving timelines and like cutting up words and paragraphs and trying to make things fit. It was not written from beginning to end. It was very fragmented, and even then, especially in the last 2 versions, things completely shifted in the timeline. Things that were like early on ended up in the end, and it was a grueling process. But if you want to publish a book, it's worth it.